When two security officers attempted to escort a decorated black Marine from his son's graduation ceremony, nobody could have predicted the silent, coordinated response of 6 Navy SEALs, rising from the audience to command the entire gymnasium, without uttering a single word. Elias Vance hadn't anticipated any recognition as he guided his car into the parking lot of Oak Haven High. The school itself was familiar, a classic Texas archetype of weathered red brick and a trio of flags snapping. In the wind above the main entrance, students milled around the gym doors, their energy a vibrant buzz in the humid air. The space was already a tapestry of proud families, fathers in crisp dress shirts, younger siblings clutching handmade signs, and a grandmother navigating carefully with her walker. He found a spot for his Dodge Charger along the chain-link fence, the engine humming softly before falling silent. Stepping out, he instinctively smoothed the immaculate lines of his deep blue Marine uniform. His boots, polished to a perfect glassy shine, weren't for show. They were a product of discipline, a ritual for a man who found comfort in precision. He surveyed his surroundings, his posture an unwavering line of strength. His face, though placid, held the quiet intensity of a man who had witnessed life from every conceivable angle. The 8-hour drive from Temple had been a pilgrimage. Flying would have been faster, but the Charger had been his wife's favorite car. 2 years after her passing, the open road was still the place he felt her presence most acutely. Elias reached into the glove compartment, his fingers finding the worn edges of a small photograph. It was an old snapshot, creased at the corners, of his wife cradling their son, Liam, as a newborn. He carefully slipped it into the inner pocket of his jacket, a silent promise whispered into the air. "I told you I wouldn't miss this." His walk toward the entrance was deliberate, each step resonating with a feeling he couldn't quite name, a potent blend of profound pride and a deep, lingering ache. Inside, the gymnasium was a cavern of noise and motion. Rows of metal chairs covered the floor, and the bleachers were already a sea of people. The atmosphere was thick with the scent of concession stand popcorn and freshly waxed floors. A scent. It was chaotic, vibrant, and alive. Elias presented his printed ticket to a volunteer by the door, a small man juggling a clipboard and a headset. The man gave the ticket a cursory glance, nodded, and pointed. "Third row, left side. Family seating is up front. You're all set." "Appreciate it," Elias said, his voice a steady baritone. He navigated the aisle, aware of the fleeting glances from other families. Some registered the uniform with a flicker of surprise before quickly looking away. A woman offered a brief, hesitant smile, then turned to whisper to her husband. Elias remained impassive. He had long been a tall, black man in uniform. He understood the language of looks, which to acknowledge and which to ignore. He located his seat, a slightly wobbly plastic chair that he adjusted without a hint of complaint. The stage before him was adorned with school banners, the class of 2024, emblazoned in large silver letters. A few school board members conversed near the podium, reviewing their notes. Elias's gaze found the rows of students gathered at the far end of the gym. Liam was somewhere in the middle, lanky and tall, with his mother's soulful eyes. 18. Years had vanished in a heartbeat. He remembered holding him on the day he was born, still in his combat fatigues, dirt lodged beneath his fingernails after a frantic flight home from Okinawa on a 4-day leave. And now, here they were. He sat perfectly still, absorbing the moment. The background noise, the scrape of chairs, the rustle of programs, a sudden burst of laughter faded into a distant hum. His world had narrowed to the stage, the sea of young faces, and the comforting weight of the photograph against his chest. Then the familiar strains of pomp and circumstance began to play, and the entire room rose as one. A wave of nervous energy rippled through the students. Some looked terrified, others were beaming. Elias stood with them, his shoulders squared, arms held loosely at his sides. The national anthem followed. As hands moved to cover hearts, Elias remained still. He didn't need to make the gesture. His very presence was a testament to his oath. He thought of his wife, imagining her happy tears, her fussing over Liam's tie 3 times before he left the house. His eyes remained fixed forward, but as the final note of the anthem hung in the air, he saw them, 2 uniformed men, walking down the side aisle, heading directly toward him. The 2 security guards moved with a clipped, officious gait. They weren't police. Their badges identified them as Aegis Security Solutions. Their uniforms consisted of standard black polo shirts tucked into cargo pants, complete with earpieces, and radios clipped to their belts. Neither looked a day over 30. The first was short and broad-shouldered, with a shaved head and a perpetually tense expression. The second was taller, lankier, and chewed gum with an air of profound boredom. Elias registered their approach immediately, but didn't react. His training had taught him that stillness was its own form of power. He kept his gaze on the stage, his hands resting calmly on his thighs. The shorter guard stopped beside his row and leaned in. "Excuse me, sir," he said, his voice low and insistent. "We're going to need you to come with us." Elias turned his head slowly. "Is there a problem?" The taller one, Keegan, stepped forward. "Yeah, this section is reserved for the families of graduating seniors." Elias blinked once, then reached into his coat and produced the same ticket he'd shown at the door. "This is my seat, 3rd row, left side. Family seating confirmed." The shorter guard, Roth, didn't bother to look at the ticket. "We were told. This section is full." Elias's posture didn't change. "It was full when I arrived. Are you going to tell me who issued that order?" Keegan shifted his weight, a flicker of unease in his eyes. He clearly hadn't anticipated such calm clarity. "Look, it's not a big deal. We've got some open seats in the back. Let's just not turn this into something it doesn't need to be." Elias's eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with a quiet, precise calculation. "I drove 8 hours to watch my son receive his diploma. I will be sitting right here." Heads had begun to turn. A woman 2 rows ahead nudged her husband, nodding in their direction. From the bleachers, the faint glint of a smartphone screen tilted their way, likely recording. Roth straightened up, his gaze sweeping the nearby crowd. "Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time." "You can ask all day," Elias replied, his voice dropping, gaining an edge of steel. "I am not moving." Keegan sucked his teeth. "Maybe you'd be more comfortable in the back. That's all we're saying." And there it was. That phrase. Elias turned his full attention to the guard. It wasn't about logistics or school policy. It was about something older, quieter, a shadow that had followed him his entire life, from boardrooms to waiting rooms, from front porches to the base cafeteria. It was a suggestion wrapped in a whisper, a judgment veiled as a courtesy. He offered no response. The atmosphere around them grew thick, charged with the unspoken recognition that a line had been crossed. Roth sensed it, too. He adjusted the FUP, radio on his hip, muttering something into his microphone while maintaining eye contact. Elias remained seated, his focus returning to the stage as if the conversation was over. For him, it was. An older woman seated next to him, her skin pale and wrinkled, leaned toward him. "Don't you let them move you," she whispered fiercely. He gave her a single appreciative nod but said nothing. He had no desire to create a scene. He was a father here to watch his son graduate, but the guards weren't done. The taller one, Keegan, lowered his voice again. "Look, if you have a problem, take it up with the school office. We're just following orders." Elias turned his head one last time. "Do you have a name, son?" The guard blinked, caught off guard. "It's Officer Keegan." "Not officer, Elias," corrected him calmly. "You're private security." Roth stepped in. "All right, that's enough. If you don't stand up—" He never finished the sentence, because at that exact moment, the gymnasium door at the far end clicked open, and 6 men entered. They wore no uniforms, no badges. They carried only themselves, with firm postures, squared shoulders, and the kind of unreadable expressions that spoke of having navigated far worse than awkward stares and flawed instructions. They didn't enter as a group, but filtered in individually, taking up different positions as if they were strangers. But to a trained eye, it was obvious. They moved with the same economy of motion, scanned the room with the same practiced gaze, and settled with the same steady, alert stillness. Elias didn't look back. He didn't need to. He knew precisely who they were. The guards, however, did not. Not yet. And they were about to find out. Elias kept his focus on the stage, his jaw set. He wasn't angry, not in the way most people understood it. But deep inside, a switch had been flipped. A switch reserved for survival, for maintaining balance and patience under immense pressure. The 2 guards lingered, their presence now less about doing a job and more about asserting dominance. It was a petty display of power, a need to remind him of their authority. What they failed to grasp was that Elias had operated in places where power was measured in life and death, not in a high school gym with folding chairs and a tinny sound system. A student's name was called, and a polite smattering of applause followed. But no one nearby was truly watching the ceremony anymore. They were watching the quiet standoff, pretending not to. The taller guard, Keegan, shifted his stance again. Leaning closer, his voice now a conspiratorial whisper. "I'm trying to do you a favor here, man. This doesn't need to get ugly." Elias's eyes flicked toward him. "You don't have that kind of favor to offer." A beat of silence. Keegan pulled back, slightly as if reevaluating his approach. But the shorter one, Roth, according to his nameplate, was less inclined to subtlety. His hand drifted toward his radio again. A few rows behind them, a man rose slowly to his feet. At first, no one paid him any mind. He didn't speak. He simply crossed his arms and stared. Clean-shaven, broad-shouldered, with eyes that missed nothing, he took an aisle seat without breaking his gaze from the scene unfolding. On the opposite side of the gym, a second man stood up. Same posture, same calm, deliberate intention. Then a third. They didn't communicate. They didn't have to. Elias knew them all. He didn't need to turn and confirm. His instincts were confirmation enough. He had led these men through mud, through gunfire, and through a silence darker than most could ever comprehend. Roth leaned down again, a new, sharper edge to his voice. "Listen, man, you're making this a situation." Elias turned his head, slow and deliberate. "And you're not listening." Roth's hand twitched toward his radio, but before he could speak, a new voice cut through the tension. "Is there a reason this man is being bothered?" The voice was clear, controlled, and calm. It was the kind of voice that didn't need to rise in volume to command attention. It dropped just enough to make everyone else fall silent. It belonged to a man standing in the center aisle, tall with a salt and pepper beard, wearing a fitted black coat over a simple gray shirt. His name was Caleb Creed Thorne. He was the man Elias had pulled from the mangled wreckage of a Humvee in Kandahar, dragging him 200 yards across open sand as bullets chewed up the ground around. "Them." Roth looked up, startled. "Who are you?" Creed didn't answer the question. He took a single step forward. "I asked you a question." Keegan raised a placating hand. "Sir, we have this under control." "No," Creed said, his tone sharpening. "You don't." Another man stood up from the bleachers, then another. There were 4 of them now, standing silent and watchful. Elias remained, seated, a pillar of calm at the center of the storm. The entire left side of the gym was now openly staring. A child pointed. A teacher tried to redirect attention back to the stage, but the diplomas had lost their audience. Creed took one more step. "You're embarrassing yourselves, and you're one breath away from making this much worse." Roth glanced at Keegan, whose confidence was visibly evaporating. It was dawning on them that they hadn't just confronted a father, they had stumbled into something else entirely. "I don't care what your orders were," Creed continued, his voice low and unwavering. "You don't put your hands on that man. You don't tell him to move. You don't ask again." The silence that fell over the gym was heavy, not with fear, but with a dawning, collective respect. It swelled as more and more people began to understand the scene playing out before them. Elias finally looked up at Creed, offering the slightest of nods. It wasn't a thank you or a request. It was recognition. Creed's expression softened for a fraction of a second before he stepped back and resumed his seat, arms folded. But the tension remained, thick and palpable. Everyone was waiting to see what the guards would do next. The gymnasium, the stage, the banners, the crowd, all dissolved into a blur in Elias's mind. His eyes were open, but he was 15 years and a world away. Afghanistan. Late afternoon in Kandahar province. The sun there didn't set. It crashed, painting the sand a deep rusty red and turning the air to steel. Elias, a gunnery sergeant, then had just finished a briefing when the world exploded. A roadside IED detonated under the lead Humvee, flipping it like a child's toy. A storm of dirt and shrapnel rained down, followed by the coordinated crack of enemy gunfire. Elias didn't think. He reacted, diving behind the twisted remains of a doorframe. Through the smoke, he saw 6 of his men pinned down behind the burning wreckage of a second vehicle. One of them was already trying to crawl forward, dragging a wounded comrade by his vest. That was Creed Thorne, just 3 months into his tour, with a bullet clean through his thigh. Elias bolted. No hesitation, no radio call for permission. He sprinted across open ground, gunfire kicking up dust at his heels, and slid into cover behind a blown-out axle. Creed looked up, his face streaked with blood and grime. "You're bleeding," Elias had stated, matter of fact. "You noticed," Creed coughed back. Elias grabbed the straps on the vest of the downed soldier, Marco Diaz, and started pulling. Creed pushed from behind, gritting his teeth. "Where's Reyes?" Elias yelled over the din. Creed pointed a trembling finger. "Left side, under the hood." That's when Elias saw him, a young SEAL, his leg trapped beneath the engine block. He was yelling, but his voice was thin, lost in the chaos. Without a word, Elias told Creed, "Stay low. Move when I do." Creed nodded, his eyes wide with a new understanding of what true leadership looked like. Elias ran again, his boots finding purchase on gravel and debris. He reached Reyes, dropped low, and gripped the mangled edge of the hood. It was immovable. "Gunny, don't!" Reyes shouted. I'm good. You're not staying here." Elias braced himself, dug his feet into the sand, and lifted. His shoulders screamed in protest, his ribs ached, and the metal groaned, but it rose. It rose just enough for Reyes to wrench his leg free. They scrambled back toward the ridgeline, gunfire cracking overhead. Creed was there with Diaz, limping heavily. 2 others, Nash and Griffin, provided cover, their faces blackened with soot, rifles at the ready. When the firefight ended, there were no cheers. There was only the sound of labored breathing and the vast, deafening silence of the valley. All 6 of them were alive. Elias was the last to stand down, staying on rear watch until the medevac arrived. He didn't say much after that. But Creed remembered. They all did. From that day forward, there was never a question. If Elias Vance needed anything, anywhere, anytime, they would be there. Back in the gym, Creed sat, his eyes locked on the 2 guards still hovering near Elias. He wasn't thinking about war. He was thinking about a promise. The man who had pulled him from a kill zone was being harassed in a high school gymnasium while trying to watch his son graduate. He clenched his fists. Another SEAL, Mateo Vega, entered and took a seat 4 rows back. Then Ethan Cole found a spot in the bleachers on the right. They didn't speak. Their presence was their voice. Elias glanced toward the back of the gym, his eyes meeting Vega's for a fraction of a second. It was enough. The guards, however, still didn't understand the silent language being spoken around them, and with their next move, their education was about to begin. On the surface, the ceremony continued. Names were announced and families clapped, some a little too loudly, as if trying to smother the tension that had settled over the room. But the gym's true focus had shifted. Eyes that should have been on the stage kept darting to the third row on the left, where Elias Vance sat like a monument, and two guards stood, frozen in indecision. Garvin, the shorter guard, glanced toward a school official who was trying to get his attention. The woman looked frantic, mouthing words and gesturing for them to back away. But Garvin shook his head. He had started this, and his pride wouldn't let him retreat. Mally, the taller one, shifted his weight, the gum in his mouth working overtime. He was clearly uncomfortable, but he didn't walk away. "Sir," Garvin said, his voice now louder, "this is your last warning." Elias didn't even turn. "To do what, exactly?" Garvin stepped forward, leaning in, until his belt buckle was inches from Elias's knee. "To stop making a scene. We don't want any trouble. Just move to the back." Elias turned his head, his gaze locking with the guards. "You're the only one causing trouble here." Garvin's nostrils flared, and then the mask slipped. "You think wearing that uniform makes you better than everyone else? This is a high school, man, not your base." A hush fell over the surrounding rows. A little girl stopped fidgeting. A father with a video camera froze. Even Mally took a half step back, as if the words had struck with more force than intended. Elias didn't flinch. He took a slow, deliberate breath. "You need to walk away." Garvin's hand dropped to the front of his belt, a gesture that was not quite a threat, but close enough, and that's when Creed stood up. He didn't rush, he didn't posture, he simply stepped into the aisle, his movement slow and focused, as if the matter had now officially become his business. The gym wasn't completely silent, but it was close. Creed's voice was sharp and clear. "If you touch him, you'll answer to me." Garvin turned. "And who the hell are you?" Creed took another step. "The man who's telling you this ends. Right now." A school board member finally noticed the escalating situation and whispered urgently to the principal. An assistant principal rose and began moving quickly toward the back, likely calling for backup on her radio. The school staff was finally waking up to the fact that this was not going to resolve itself quietly. More SEALs rose from their seats, scattered across the room. There was no signal, no spoken command. It was a shared, unified instinct taking over. By now, all six were on their feet. Garvin looked around, the reality of the situation finally dawning on him. These weren't just concerned parents. Their presence filled the space like the heavy pressure before a storm. Creed stepped closer. "You have two choices. You walk away now, or you watch this go somewhere you don't want it to go." Mally's voice finally broke. "Let's just back off, man." But Garvin hesitated. Elias spoke again, his voice calm, directed not at Garvin, but at Creed. "Don't waste your breath." He already made his decision. Creed's expression remained hard. He lowered his voice for the final time. "Don't mistake my silence for weakness." At last, Garvin took a step back. It wasn't much, but it was a retreat. His hand fell away from his belt. His face was flushed with anger, but he was outnumbered and profoundly outclassed. The principal appeared in the aisle, speaking quickly and quietly to the two guards. Her words were firm enough to send them walking toward the back exit, their gazes fixed on the floor. Elias exhaled a long, slow release of breath. Creed sat back down. The six SEALs remained standing, a silent watch. But the moment still hung in the air. And from the student lineup, Liam Vance had seen everything, his hands clenched into tight fists at his sides. Liam Vance stood near the center of the graduating class, sandwiched between a girl with vibrant pink braids and a boy whose graduation gown was perpetually slipping off one shoulder. They were trying to stay in the moment, whispering jokes and nervously checking their name cards, but Liam's world had narrowed. He'd seen the two guards approach his father the moment the anthem faded. At first, he'd dismissed it, but a knot in his gut told him otherwise. Then he saw his father's posture, utterly still, composed, yet locked in. He'd seen that look once before, when he was 12 and had come home from school in tears over something a bully had said. His dad hadn't raised his voice then either. He had simply sat with that same expression, like steel refusing to bend. Liam watched, unable to hear the words, but reading the body language perfectly. He saw the guards standing too close, his father's calm refusal. And then he saw the man, in the dark coat rise. He knew instinctively that this was no ordinary parent. This man knew his father. The way he positioned himself between the guards and the row wasn't for show. It was a shield. It was for Elias Vance. Then another man stood, and another. It wasn't loud, but it felt like the temperature in the room had dropped. Everyone was watching. Liam's heart hammered against his ribs, not with fear, but with a combustible mix of pride and fire. He'd grown up with fragments of his dad's service. Not the dark parts, his father kept those locked away, but the echoes, a buddy who sent a Christmas card every year without fail, a jagged scar with a story he never told, a dusty box in the garage marked Kandahar that was never to be opened. He'd never known the names or seen the faces, but now here they were, standing as if they'd been waiting for this very call, as if they had never stopped watching his father's back. Liam blinked hard, fighting the burn behind his eyes. The line of students shuffled forward. The ceremony was moving on, but the room felt different. The energy irrevocably shifted. It was no longer about balloons and banners. It was about honor. An assistant principal tapped his shoulder, but he didn't register her words, just nodded absently. The student beside him leaned in. "Is that your dad?" Liam didn't have to answer. The entire gymnasium had witnessed it. Everyone in that building now understood exactly what kind of man Elias Vance was. In the audience, Creed remained standing, his gaze fixed on Elias, who sat as if nothing had happened, his eyes locked on the stage. The rest of the SEALs held their positions, their silent presence, speaking with more authority than any microphone could. A few parents began to clap louder for each graduate, as if trying to mend the torn fabric of the ceremony. The gym had become a living entity, stirred from its placid celebration by a moment of injustice and held steady by the profound weight of loyalty. The moment that would break through it all was still to come. When Liam's name was finally called, the room would no longer be able to pretend. The line moved faster. Students around him were fidgeting, whispering, trying to reclaim their excitement. But Liam was somewhere else now, his mind replaying the image of his father, calm, quiet, unshakable, and the warriors who rose around him without a word. For the first time, Liam began to understand the true weight his father carried. The medals in the wooden box, the folded flag on the bookshelf, they weren't just relics. Today, they had a voice. Today, they stood up. The announcer called the next name, then another. Liam was 3 people from the stage. He wiped his sweaty palms on his gown. The girl in front of him turned, grinning. "You ready?" Liam managed a small smile. "More than you know." He stepped forward. On the other side of the gym, Elias leaned forward ever so slightly, his focus narrowed to one boy in a black robe with red and white honor cords. The boy who had his mother's smile. 1 name, 2 names. Then the announcer paused, cleared her throat, and spoke with a newfound gravity. "Liam Vance." For a split second, there was silence. Then the room didn't just applaud. It erupted. It wasn't the sound of polite clapping. It was deep, rhythmic, and powerful. The 6 SEALs, still standing, began to applaud in perfect, forceful unison. It wasn't a performance. It was a salute, rendered in sound, a declaration that said, "We see you. We see your father. We honor you both." Liam walked across the stage, chin high, his steps even and sure. His heart pounded, not with nerves, but with a pride so fierce it almost hurt, a pride in knowing exactly who his father was. He accepted his diploma, shook the principal's hand, and turned to the audience. His eyes scanned the crowd and found him. Elias didn't wave or stand. He simply met his son's gaze and offered the smallest, most meaningful smile of the day. Liam nodded once and walked off the stage as the applause thundered on. Parents who had been silent before were now clapping. With fervor, some were on their feet. A few were wiping their eyes, caught up in the gravity of a moment they didn't fully understand, but deeply felt. Elias leaned back in his chair, the tension finally leaving his shoulders. He was not a man who cried in public, but deep inside, something loosened. It wasn't grief or pain, but release, the kind that comes when a circle feels for a moment complete. The story, however, wasn't over. When father and son met outside, it would be about more than just a proud hug. It would be the passing of a legacy. 20 minutes later, the final name was called. Caps flew into the air amid cheers and relieved embraces. As students flooded out of the gymnasium's double doors, Elias remained seated, letting the joyful chaos wash over him. His eyes tracked Liam until he disappeared into the hallway with his classmates. His every interaction a high five. From a teacher, a quick hug from a friend, observed and cherished. Even amidst the celebration, Liam turned once, a fleeting glance back that held a world of meaning. "Did you see me?" Elias's expression was the answer. Every second, the crowd thinned. Elias stood, stretching his legs. Creed walked over as the gym emptied. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Elias nodded. "Been through worse?" A faint smile touched Creed's lips. "Yeah, but it still shouldn't have happened." "No," Elias agreed. "It shouldn't have." Javier Meeks joined them. "We tried to stay. Low-key, but once that guy put his hand near his belt..." Elias raised a hand. "You all did what was necessary. That was enough." The three men stood in the quiet, cavernous space for a moment longer. Then Elias said, "I need to see my boy." Outside, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the concrete. Liam stood near the flagpole, gown half unzipped, diploma in hand. When he saw his father approaching, the world around him seemed to fade away. They met in the middle. "You okay?" Liam asked, his voice tight. Elias nodded. "Are you?" "Yeah," Liam said, looking down. "They tried to move you." "I know." Liam's jaw tightened. "I was ready to walk off that stage, Dad. I swear, I was 2 seconds from saying something." Elias placed a firm hand on his son's shoulder. "And that's precisely why you didn't." Liam looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" "Because you knew I could handle it," Elias explained. "And because you handled your moment with dignity. You didn't let anyone steal it from you." Liam was silent for a moment. "Who were those guys?" Elias glanced toward the 6 SEALs, now gathered near the exit, a quiet brotherhood keeping watch. "They're men I bled with," he said. "Men who understand what loyalty means. Men who don't forget." "That was powerful," Liam breathed. "It was necessary," Elias replied. "Sometimes silence is louder than shouting, and sometimes standing up, without saying a word, says more than 1,000 speeches." A beat passed between them. Then Liam smiled. "You gonna tell me those war stories now?" Elias chuckled. "Some of them. You're old enough for the real parts now." They stood there, shoulder to shoulder. Father and son, 2 men bound by a legacy. Not just of blood, but of honor. Across the lot, Creed raised a hand, not a wave, but a gesture of profound respect. Liam returned it without hesitation. The real lesson, however, had yet to be spoken aloud. By the time Elias and Liam walked back to the Charger, most of the crowd had dispersed. The air had cooled, softened by the light of early evening. Elias unlocked the car, the same one his wife had driven to parent-teacher conferences. Liam paused at the passenger door. "She would have been screaming the loudest today," he said softly. She would have made you retake every single photo until your smile was perfect, Elias replied, with a sad grin. They settled into the car, the warmth of the interior sealing them off from the world. I have to ask, Liam began, why didn't you say anything to them? You just sat there. Elias tapped the steering wheel. Because my dignity doesn't require me to stand up and announce it, and my strength doesn't need to be shouted to be heard. He turned to his son. You know how many times in life I've had to choose between letting something go or making it explode. What happened today, it wasn't new, but how we choose to respond, that is what defines us. But they disrespected you, Liam insisted, in front of everyone. Yes, Elias said calmly, and everyone saw it. But they also saw the truth. They saw 6 men who could have been anywhere else in the world stand up, not because I asked them to, but because they knew what that moment stood for. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the folded photograph of his wife and baby Liam. I carried this through Kandahar. I carried it through losing your mom. And I carried it here today. Not because it gives me strength, but because it reminds me of what is worth protecting. Liam's voice was barely a whisper. You always knew they had your back, Elias smiled. I didn't need to know. I had faith. Real men don't disappear when things get difficult. They show up, and they stand. After a long pause, Liam spoke again. I want to be like that, like you. You already are, Elias said. You walked that stage with your head held high. You didn't let anger ruin your achievement. You stayed grounded when the world was trying to knock you off balance. Outside, the last of the SEALs were getting into their cars. Creed gave the Charger one final look before driving away. Elias nodded once in return, a silent acknowledgement of an unbreakable bond. Liam leaned back in his seat. So, what now? Elias turned the key, and the engine rumbled to life. Now, we drive home, and you're buying dinner. Liam grinned. Waffle. House? Elias chuckled. Of course. As they pulled out of the parking lot, the memory of what had happened in that gym lingered. For Liam, that day was about far more than a diploma. It was the day he learned that manhood had nothing to do with making noise, and everything to do with how you carry yourself in the quiet moments. Some people shout to be seen, others simply sit in silence and are never forgotten.